Good morning. Good morning. Cool. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Um, I'm talking to you today on building production-worthy applications with Django. A little bit myself. Oluwafemi Tairu. Currently a cloud developer at Data Melon. Data Melon is a cloud solution or cloud service consultant. If you want to follow me on Twitter, my Twitter handle is _Imarex_. That's me on GitHub, Imarex. And of course, this is the official introduction, because then Iman has many faces. Iman actually really does have many faces. So aside from being a cloud developer, also a software developer. I do most of the software development, mostly with Python and Django. And I'll be talking to you today on some of the experiences I've had as a Django developer. So beginning production worthy website or app with Django is all about knowing what to do or what checklists to have before you actually deploy Django apps to production. And why is this necessary? This is necessary for various reasons, some of which I will share today. And then at the end of the day, we would have gone through the checklist or what qualities your app or application should have before it's Django production worthy, so to say. So when talking about production is one of the process or steps in the software release lifecycle. Brief explanation on that. Software release lifecycle or cycle is just the stages from development of a particular software to production. So this cycle ranges from organizations to individuals and the like. Some persons may have just a few steps, and then others more than just 3 or 4. So on the software lifecycle, we have the software moving from what we call the pre-alpha, then to the alpha, the beta, and release candidate, and then production. Maybe other steps in this cycle that is actually not included here. Some organizations have beta 1, beta 2, and maybe some other stages before they actually get to the production. So when we're talking about a software that is in production, it's just that moment when you decide to make your website available to users. So you may be a freelance developer, just an individual. You have this website you've built for yourself, your personal website. You're running your system. It's all local host with your port 8,000 or something. That's still on your system. The moment you decide to host it on Heroku or you host it on AWS or Google Cloud and give people the access to use it, then it becomes an app in production. So what we'll be talking about today is what should your Django app have before it gets to production. That's simply what this stuff is going to be about. So what then is the Django? What is Django actually? Django is a Python framework, and for most people, when I want to describe what Django is, I just tell them Django is a web framework for perfection headline, and that's coming from the Django headline. So simply put, that's just Django basically. It's a web framework that allows you to build web applications with Python. Now, unlike other web frameworks built with Python, Django comes with most of the things you will need: packages, plugins, and as it is, so you're ready to go immediately you install the application. Though for you to get to production, you might have to tweak some things or add some things, and that's what we're talking about today. So yeah, what then is a production application checklist, which is what do we have to do before our application gets to production. So I have a couple of checklists here. The first one is the Django settings, and then you go to checklist of performance, then security, login and error reporting, then CICD, which is continuous integration and continuous development or deployment. So we're just going to go through this checklist, and I hope by the end of the day we'll be able to take just Django from its bare installation to a app that is production worthy. So first of all, Django settings. So Django comes with just about everything you need. So when you do a normal Django installation, let me just switch to a code environment. When you do a normal Django installation, your settings may look something similar to this, where you base directory, install app, middleware, options for authentication, language, time zone, static URLs. You would have a secret key, of course, and maybe some other stuff. It's going to come default with a database connection to SQLite or SQLite, and that's just about it. Django gives you the ability to quickly do a check on the application to see if it is good. And you can do that by just doing Python manager py check -- deploy. So yeah, I have this Django application here specifically for this talk, and I'm just going to quickly run this command on this Django application check -- deploy. So when I run this, I'm using the dev settings for this check for stackers. So this basically contains the normal default Django settings and some few stuff. I'm still adding OS debug is still set to true. I've installed some couple of apps. That's Django toolbar. And then after that is all of these are in my environment variables, which I already have installed. I'm using a catch. I'm using Django RQ, although that's not really implemented there. So that's basically what I have in my dev settings. So I'm just going to go ahead and run this. And then that's going to take about it. Comes with all of this warning saying, hey, yo, ready to be deployed. The first thing is saying security. You have to set this setting secure HCS seconds. Another security warning and another, and then the deployment is still set to true and secure referral policy. So this Django is telling you already that this is not fit to be deployed. We're going to go over all of the settings and what they mean and which one we should have installed for a production application. So just going to talk a little bit about the setup I have here. So you see I have this configuration for my application. This is currently hosted on GitHub. Maybe after my talk, I'm just going to link to this on GitHub. Or you can just find it yourself, just go to Emacs and PyCon Africa 2020. So I have the base default Django settings. Of course, this is the default folder project application, which is PyCon. I've named PyCon. And if there's something you've noticed, there is a place all of my apps in a folder called apps. Now, I've done this because in true sense, basically what I've learned is at the end of the day, when you're generate a Django, and you may end up having multiple apps depending on how large the application is. If you keep that on the root folder, at the point you may be having multiple folders, and then it's be difficult for you to know which. So most times for me, I always put all of my apps under a single folder just to make sure that everything is right. So this is just a folder for cache from PyTest. Then I have normal static files, GTignore, of course, and then Travis for CICD. I'll explain that. And then some couple of other folders, and of course the manager file. So and see which we need for production. So first of all, one of the important settings for Django is your secret key. So your secret key is supposed to be a random JVIT that most of the time you're not even supposed to, or you're not supposed to be able to say it at any point in time. It's supposed to be a random string. So Django gives you a default when you install something similar to this. This is not something I don't know, except if you are a super brain or super power. I can't actually say this without looking at it. So it's supposed to be a really, really random string. This is very important because you're not actually supposed to let this out to the to your users or anybody. Nobody's supposed to have access to this secret key. That's it. So the next one is the debug. So the debug is a setting that has a Boolean value, either true or false. So when your debug is true, then that means you're currently in the debug stage. But when it's false, then that's for production. So most of the time, you see that's one Django is actually logging here. It says on the security line, it said you should not have the bug set to true in deployment, and that's very important for multiple reasons. Actually, one of those reasons is if your user, say for instance, visits a page that is not found, say for example this, and then it says this link does not exist. Of course, not existing. They get this nice looking page. Of course, this looks cool and very, very beautiful. Django has done a good work spinning this up. But this is not supposed to be seen by users because um, if your user is someone who doesn't code, he or she is already lost. He doesn't know what exactly is going on here. I mean, what exactly is this? And if the person codes, you're already giving out information about your page or your website that is not actually supposed to be out. And another reason why you have to set your debug to false when going to production is, take for example, there's an error. I've actually placed an error in my code, and I try to run this, and of course, we get this nice, beautiful looking page. But then again, the only thing about this is because it is debug is set to true, Django gives you just about everything you have in your settings. So all of your passcode, your server access, and even your secret key is all logged here. So imagine this going into production. I mean, anybody anywhere can tamper with your application, and this stuff can actually be supposed to do. So for every single time you're trying to deploy an application to production, you should always make sure to force. That's actually very important. Now the next one is allowed host. So allowed host is just to cater for security with cross-site referencing that CFRF, just to make sure that only some particular applications can actually connect or get into that's your Python application. So in your debug setting or in your staging or your pre-alpha or your pre-beta, you can always use it as allowing just anything, which is this asterisk. But when you're going to production, you have to have a list of allowed domains or subdomains. Here, this Python application or this Django application is hosted on this domain, which is coming from Google Cloud App Engine. So I've included just this domain, and then similar domains. This basically covers for www or this or any other subdomains that may add to this. So this just ensures that whoever is calling this application or whatever is calling this application is actually coming from this particular domain or subdomain. Next on the checklist is databases. There's not much this and connection mask stage. So the reason why this is important is your database settings may be anything. I've not really seen anybody using SQLite in production, but of course you may have some cases where you have to use SQLite. But one thing I really want to mention is mass connection age. This is not included in the default Django settings, of course, but include this for specific reasons. Take, for example, you run an application where database calls have to be made, say, within the space of minutes, seconds, like concurrent database calls at the same time with space of seconds or minutes. Then you might want to add this connection at age. So Django knows it's supposed to keep the connection open. So when you're actually trying to do a DB call, it's not trying to sort of like call this guy again, and then there's lag or there's time spent trying to connect or trying to access that database before you actually get that. And the only thing this does basically is to improve performance of your production application and make sure that whatever you're pulling out from your database is back fast to your users. So the next one is static root and media URL. So by default, as I've done here in your own environment for testing, have your static applications or your static files there in your folder and just have it bundled with your application. But for production, you have to make sure that, as advised by Django, and for cool security reasons and as well as performance, you have to make sure that is separate from your Django server. So what I've done here is I've used storages is a PyPy plugin. I've set up Django storages. I've connected this to a bucket in Google Cloud. So I created the bucket here. And of course, you would need the service account key, which I've named Travis Sackford JSON. And what this basically does is instead of using this root folder as your static file, you make use of Django storages. So when you do Python manager file collect static, it moves all of your static files to the bucket side. You could actually use AWS S3 bucket too, or use Google Cloud. So it moves all of those static applications there. And then the cool thing about this is apart from making that your static files are not present in your unbundled with your application files, is you can also make use of CDN. CDN is just context-driven network, and what this does is just to ensure that some of the calls to the static files are actually linked. So that again, in turn, increases the performance of your Django application and make sure that requests for static files actually come much more quicker than it should on a norm. So yeah, I've actually made use of Google Cloud storage bucket. I did some minor configurations where I on a static IP address, of course, and then I've open sourced this using hidden at the back of a load balancer. Of course, you might not have to do all of this, or it may be simpler on all other platforms. Take, for example, AWS, you just have to connect your S3 bucket to a cloud front. Get the gist that you're actually supposed to host all of your static files in a different, or you have to put them in a different server or host them differently from where you have your Django application. Then you can actually go the extra mile to provision a CDN for that particular application. So the next one on the Django settings list is actually HTTPS. So when you're running on your local host, you don't have to worry about HTTPS. You just do localhost and then port, and then boom, you're good to go. But when you're taking this to production, it is important for you to HTTPS configure to ensure that to some extent nobody can break or intercept requests being sent from the client to the server. And that's why HTTPS is very important. Google now actually even ranks sites that have HTTPS, that SSL certificate enabled, more than the sites that don't have that. So here, what I've done to ensure that is I've made sure that we're using, we are forcing unnecessary redirect. So if you actually use a particular application using HTTPS, what it does with these Django settings I've highlighted is to say, hey, yo, I'm going to forward you to a much more secure your hard HTTPS to the back. So it sort of like ensures that. And then it's saying, oh, I have to preload, or this does basically say, oh, I'm preloading this settings for you actually. And then this is just about, I think this is a year, or you can set it to be maybe lesser or more. And this settings basically says, for all of the settings of HTTPS, include the same for subdomains. So take, for example, if you use Django subdomains to actually configure subdomain for your Django application, which ensures that the same settings for SSL reloading applies to subdomains you have. So with just few settings, you can, or you're sure that your Django application is actually forced to use HTTPS. So anybody who's using a Django application in production is forced to actually use HTTPS. Next one is CSR have cookie and session cookie secure. So this are actually security settings that you should actually enable in the Django production app to make sure that your cookie or your session cookies, whatever, or whichever one you're actually making use on your Django application, is actually being applied HTTPS only. This too basically ensures that, okay, nobody or anybody using HTTP, the HTTPS would not be able to use your cookie or transfer your cookie one way or the other. Those a little bit further to ensure that Django application is actually secure. Then another one of the settings which may not be compulsory depending on what you're trying to do is the email backend. This is just a bunch of settings that basically specifies what email provider you want to be using to send emails, and just a couple of settings for that. I have an email host which is I'm using this, but this doesn't exist. So this could be mail.privatemail.com or mail.google.com, and then your user, which could be Tairu Oluwafemi at PyCon Africa, PyCon South Africa, something similar. That doesn't exist, but that's like you get the gist of what I'm trying to say. And then your password goes here. Now, one thing I want to say is when deploying applications to production, always ensure that any of your passwords or access key are coded. This ensures that just in case, if you're using or you're pushing this to a repository, which sometimes happen, in case your mistakenly gets to the wrong hands, you don't have access to all of the secret keys. That's number one. And then another cool thing is if you have all of your settings saved in a separate part of your application, or if they're residing on as an environment on your Linux server or whatever server you're actually trying to use, then it's easy for you to update that particular key or that password. Take for example, if I've used this password, say in 2 or 5 other places, and the password, take for example that change. So I have to go and then do a command find and then start replacing all of those places one by one, right? But if you have this say in an environment variable, I mean you just have to update once and then it's reflecting everywhere. So apart from the key, it's actually even easy to actually update all of these keys if you have them as an environment variable or saved somewhere else for reasons. And then I specify the email port that is used TFL. You could actually specify that you use SSL. And then as I'm making use of Django's ambient email for ambient email functional library for SMTP email backend. And yeah, that's it for email backend. Then the next one is login. I'm going to skip this now because I'm going to talk about login in more format in the next couple of slides. And then the next one is max file upload. So I actually don't include my max file upload in some of my Django applications, but this changed after I witnessed something that was actually, I mean, I had an application in production and then people were actually making use of the application. And then this actually requires that you upload an image. It was an e-commerce application. You have to upload an image alongside other stuff. And then we just keep getting a report of, I can upload this, I can do this, I can do that. Okay, this works perfectly. It checks out in that. It works perfectly on my Postman. This is it on my system, it works. Not knowing that the files I was actually uploading was actually less than about 5 MB or so. And then the files they are trying to upload in production was up to 10 MB, 15 MB, 20 MB. And because I didn't the max file upload higher than the default max file upload that Django allowed. So just in case you want to be doing anything related to file uploads or giving users the access to actually upload, you want to do this in your Django. It's just simple to specify file max, file upload max, file upload max file upload, and give that a value depending on how much in MB you want this or your users to actually upload. And just in case you're not doing anything about uploads, feel free to skip that. If you're actually making use of, say, Nginx or any sort, you have to actually make some settings there to actually ensure that this works perfectly. So that's it on Django settings. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch and make use of this production settings. And let's just run that check again and see what happens this time. So I'm just to make sure that I change all of those environment variables. Oh, no, actually changed the wrong one. Sorry. I'm supposed to make this. Yeah. Like this. No, just put this on. If I run Let's check again. Let's just see. Oops, that didn't work according to plan. I'm just going to run that again. sh, dot sh. Okay. That check again. Okay. Something is not right. Settings production. Let me just do this. Next up this manually and see. Okay. So yeah, that works. We're just left with settings which I didn't include in the production. That basically skipped my mind. But have all of the settings set up, you're cool. And then just this last one, and then Django basically validates that, okay, yeah, your application is good to go or to be deployed. Although there are still other checks you can run. Take, for example, in Mozilla Usability. I'm going to talk about that later. So let's go to the next one, which is on performance. So for some time now, I've actually been much more obsessed about query optimization because I believe it's a lot. And Django has done to talk about performance here. I've listed all of this link after my slide. I'm going to share a link to that. So Django has talked about performance here. What you need to do includes how you call the len or count on your query set and kitchen, of course. It has also talked about database optimization, more full details here. And you actually have to worry about database optimization is just to increase the speed or load time or response or how fast response to your users. There are a lot of stuff you have to focus on when talking about optimization. But there are two Django functions I'm actually really cool, or I actually think is cool, which is related and preferred related. So sometimes you might call one or more tables, and then you have to go through and do stuff. This table is actually connected using a relationship, of course, either a foreign key or many-to-many key or whatever relationship you're using to connect. And have each one of those every single time, and then you go from one to the other trying to load it is actually going to take time, and you're doing multiple database connections. So the cool thing about select related and preferred related, I think you should actually check it out, is in the case of preferred related, it's actually good for all other foreign key relations. The foreign key, while select related has to be foreign key. So preferred related is basically does the job on the Python side, while the select does the job on the SQL side. This just means that your query is actually faster, and instead of doing one or multiple database queries, you're just doing one. I've written an article about, I think I'll just share a link to that for more details. But I think you should actually check out the Django Docs for more ways to actually optimize your query, just to make sure that you get faster load time and speed, and you don't have to do multiple before you can actually serve your users the response they need. Another one is unifying CSS. You may be thinking, I'm a Django developer. I don't need to worry about this. Make sure that all of this is actually unified, because yeah, it works if you actually use a content delivery network to have the static file. But unifying your CSS code or your JavaScript code also ensures that the file size is actually much more or lesser, and then delivery or response of your page to your users is actually faster. So that's it on performance. About the CDN earlier on, where I actually hosted some of this. I hosted all of my static files on Google Bucket, and then I've connected CDN, which is available here. So I've just used an IP address because, of course, this is a demo. So if you visit that IP address, this is Django admin CSS code. So once you have all of these static files stored in your bucket, as I have them here, it's very, then you can just use them as a CDN, and that also ensures that there is a faster response when you actually call or try to use all of these assets. This is not really unified, uh, but it's just good to actually unify your CSS and JS codes just to increase performance. Next, and I think the big one on the production checklist is actually security. I mean, you can't talk, you can't say enough about security. Security is actually very important. You can't have 100% or an ideal situation when it comes to security, but you have to put the right checks in place just to make sure that whatever application is going into production actually has the right or the necessary. So first things first on the security checklist is the debug. The debug, of course, has to be set to false. It should not be true so as to avoid exposing all of your secrets in production. And then always make sure that you avoid as much as possible to hide all of your secret keys and the rest of them. Use an environment variable if you have to, host them somewhere else or encrypt them. On AWS, you can encrypt them with encryption keys. You can do the same on Google Cloud, or just store them somewhere different and then just call them when you're actually making use or loading or starting up the application. Just to make sure that none of your application credentials is actually open to the world for anybody to tamper with. And then we talked about the security settings, which is very important. Secure content for your cookie and for your CSRF token. And another one is the SSL filter. Django has made all of this easy. You just have to set a value of true and false for most of them, and then it takes care of all of those things for you. You set SSL, XSS, cross-site scripting just to enable that user can actually use this to actually get into your site. And of course, SSL redirect. Now, one very important thing that I think we should actually do when pushing Django apps to production is to always change the URL of common stuff like your Django admin, your how to worker, or your salary path. Yeah. So, take for example, if you have an application running in production and then your URL is /admin. I mean, that's like easy for anybody to get because the default comes with admin. So you want to change that to something different, something that it will actually be different for someone to actually basically figure out. So for my own application, I've just used Python_base_admin. You could use something that's really much different from that. Do the same thing for our worker, salary, or any other package that you're actually making use of. Adding a URL or something of sort. Now, a new one that is really much a thing now recently is content security policy. That's the CICD. So out of the box, Django doesn't have something, or the last time I checked, Django does not have something to actually support that. Or you can actually get a package, a Python package that is called CSP. And then you can have some couple of configurations to actually make sure that your application checks out on that. So I have some of these configurations here, basically saying no script, either CSS script or JavaScript, is actually loaded on this application that is not coming from either the application itself or, in this case, my storage bucket. So this just ensures that whatever for a script or a source for a CSS file or an image file, application is, and in some cases, loading of frame and even form action, everything comes from your site and your site alone. So nobody has the ability to actually ingest a JavaScript file to actually run stuff in your application. Everything is actually going to be coming from my storage bucket. Or in this case, because I've used Bootstrap, I've actually also included CDN for Bootstrap. You can actually do the same thing for scripts, of course, image, font, even the base URL, and then frame. Nobody has the right to load frames in the application and then try to manipulate or do some stuff with the users. So all of the things on security, and of course, HTTP stands for security. That's all of this you have here to actually preload the settings, have that set up for, this is about it, and then also include subdomains. So once you have all of this set up, I mean, you have actually done what you can do about security, and then you just have to look forward to all other stuff you can actually do on security. So like I said, this application is actually hosted. I've used Google App Engine to actually host this. And then you could find the URL. In the URL is python.new agent. This is just the Django application. I didn't really do much. So to test all of the security settings for what I have in production, I'm making use of Mozilla Observatory. So I have the link here and then this to see. Okay, yeah, and I think that's a good score. I should be proud to go show this report card to my mom. So all of the test score, you see, content feature policy is a good score has been implemented. Cookies, cool on that. Cross-origin source sharing, HTTP public key pairing, redirection policy, extreme options, and XSS protection. All of this has actually been set up in production, and this checks out well. So that's it on security for production applications. Next is logging and reporting. Okay, so some couple of days, let me just share very quickly. Some couple of days ago, we developed an application. Although, yeah, that was not in Django, that was in Vue and North. And after this got into production, I mean, the client came back with some few bugs here and there. And then someone I work with, he just had to post that on his status and weird things happen in production. I'm like, oh yeah, cool. You're actually getting around a bit. Pretty weird stuff actually happen in production. And the only way for you to actually know what is going on and know when this actually happens is to properly configure your login and error reporting. So Django has an error reporting ambient, of course. It has everything actually. For server errors, you just have to do minor configurations to have information sent when there's a 404 error, when there's 500 error, which is server error. But one very important thing that you should do is also you could use third-party error reporting applications. For me, I use Sentry, right? And the implementation or integrating that with your Django application is really, really simple. Of course, they have install, pip install, Sentry as really import all of this. This is the Django integration, and then I'm using RQ and Redis. Oh, I thought I was going to use that, so that actually includes all of this. And then you come right in your settings folder and just do SDK in it. This is actually a URL specific to this particular application. I can specify a release ID or name for this. So what this does is whenever you have a bug or something in your application, that would actually be sent over to Sentry, and you can see in more details what happened. You can actually use the capture function for Sentry SDK to actually even log errors from basic exceptions in your Python code. So I try to I try to put some bugs in my application, and that's actually been logged in Sentry. The first one is, of course, the default integration actually to insert. But this one is the one I'm actually really cool about. I inserted this, and that was because I made the allowed host. This actually had HTTPS and then all of this. And then I tried to call the application in production, and then this error was actually reported saying invalid HTTP host. Although on the client side, what I saw was error 500. But this came here immediately, and I got a mail already in the email by using registering for this. And then this sort of like gives you a video of what has actually happened and where it actually happened. So it tells me the browser that occurred, little details about the application, and then it tells me what kind of headers was sent while making this call. Some couple of stuff about the environment variable, the device, and just more in-depth details. So with these, you can actually look at this and say, oh, an error occurred in production. I think we should get right on and try to fix that. So this just ensures that whenever error happens, you know about it first, even before your users report, and then you can actually fix that immediately because you know where that is actually happening. And just in case you're making use of the Django default um, user model and all, you can actually get more details about the user by just adding a simple one line of code to the SDK initialization. So the next one here is CICD. CICD. So CICD is basically continuous integration and continuous deployment or continuous delivery. And this is the part where you get to push all of this code to the cloud. Of course, Python applications have to be open in the cloud. I didn't know what it was like really for developers and how they actually push stuff up. I mean, I had experience with PHP then and cPanel. And then for every time you change stuff in your PHP code, you have to open files or an FTP server, and then you have to push all of those files up manually. But it's different now. You have a lot of CI/CD applications. You have GitHub there. You have GitLab there that makes sure that as you're writing your codes, you can actually push them up to a particular repository, as I've done in this case, and then that is available, and you can do some of that stuff with that particular code you have. So CI/CD just has to do with what happens from you planning to your code, and then building your code, and of course testing your code. Then the continuous delivery or continuous deployment part has to do with deploying that application to production. So I have actually pushed up my code to GitHub. This is my code on GitHub here. And in terms of deployment to the cloud, I'm making use of Travis CI, although there are other CI CD applications you can actually make use of. You can make use of CI. GitHub has GitHub Actions. If you're making use of AWS, you could just make use of AWS Code Pipeline. There's Google Cloud Dunes there. So there's just a lot of them. You have things there that you can actually make use of. So what this just says is, I mean, I have my Travis CI config somewhere here, specifying all of the steps. I've specified I'm using Python as a language. I specified the Python version. I actually encrypted my service account key, and all I'm doing here is just decrypting that. Then I install the packages I made use of, and then once that checks out, the cloud. And then here I've made use of Google App Engine. So what that does is for every time I push, or however I specify it, for every time I push a code up, it just goes ahead and do all of these things for me without me having to do anything actually. So it actually goes ahead, runs the PyTest, and if that checks okay, then it goes ahead and deploy. But if it doesn't go well, then deployment is actually going to be that's just what CICD is all about. It allows you make sure you actually focus on just code building, and then you can actually just relax and know that your code is continuously being deployed just to your user. And then for every time you change the code, you don't have to SSH into a particular Linux instance to change stuff or do stuff. And then your code or your modifications actually get to your users on time. So having said that, that's just about all of the checklists I have for deploying Django applications to production. Of course, there might be more you might want to add, but for me, production applications or when putting stuff to production, I make sure that all of this or actually tick all of this checklist before actually deploy applications to production. So yeah, I don't know if there are any questions. I will take questions now. Okay, okay, so do we have any questions? You could just drop that in the chat. Any questions from anybody? Oh, that basically means I was a very good tutor since we don't have any questions. Oh, there's a question. Oh, how long did it take to build out my checklist? Okay, so I can't really say it took me so time to actually build out this checklist. I mean, everything I said today actually comes from what I've done over the years or what I'm still currently doing. So it just has to do with what I do when I'm pushing applications to production or what I think uh, should actually be done. So yeah, it's just a thing that happened based on experience. There may be more on the checklist, uh, depending on what application you're trying to develop. I mean, this is a basic application, but you can actually still have more. Yeah, sure. It's a list that you could actually have more stuff added. Uh, Django settings can go as much as 500 lines, so you could still have some other security check or stuff you have to do before you can actually deploy. But for starters, yeah, cool. Once you have this set up, your application is production worthy. Uh, Steven, what's your advice between Flask and Django for beginners? So yeah, I focused more on Django here today, but I believe the same thing should actually apply to Flask as a web framework or any other Python web frameworks you may be using. The only thing is you might not have the luxury of having this um, as something that comes with your particular framework. So I know in the case of Flask, you might have to either write the code for all of this yourself as a middleware because in Django we have middleware, so you might have to write all of this yourself or use packages. But yeah, the same thing still or still applies to Flask and any other framework to make sure that you cater for security actually deploying. And then you have to make sure that you set up your CICD pipeline. You have to make sure that you do adequate logging of errors that are causing the platform. So it's just about the same, almost the same checklist, or the same checklist for Flask or any other web application you have with Python. Oh, cool. So any other questions? Which is more secure between okay. Uh, you can actually say one Python framework is actually secure than the other. It all depends on what settings you actually put in place. I mean, if you have a Django application, I mean, you just do Django admin, start project, the name of your project, and then just push that up to production. I mean, it's going to be as vulnerable as it can be. So it's a thing between which is more secure in Django or Flask. It's a thing of what checks do you put for security on your Django application and what checks are you putting on your Flask application. So if you have the right security checks on your Flask application, I mean, it's going to be as secure as it should be. And then if you have it on Django, you would have the same thing. The only thing is, I mean, Django comes with most of these things in Vim, and you just have to call or put the right settings in place. I think that's just the difference. But as regards which is more secure, I think that depends on you, the coder. What are you putting? What's your architecture like? What have you written in your application? Any other questions? Okay, I think okay. One last question. What's your take on function-based views and class-based? Do you prefer one, other, and why? Uh, I don't actually have a preference as function or class-based views. I'm going to say it all depends on what you're trying to write and what your application architecture is more of like. So there are times when it's advisable for you to use class-based views, and sometimes you have to make use of function-based. Right? Most of the time when I'm writing APIs, I mean, I just make use of function-based. But if you're building a regular Django application where you want to do the submit function, you want to do the login, the logout, you might decide class-based view. So yeah, I don't have any preference per se. It all depends on what you're trying to do and why you actually want to use a class-based view or a function-based view. So yeah, I think that's going to be my question. What steps do one take to master Django? That's um I mean, for me, I think mastering Django has to do with how long you're using it. So you want to do more on the usage. The deeper you go in experience, you get to learn about more stuff that Django has and what it can offer. But for me, when I'm deploying or when I'm changing Django applications, one thing I always have by my side is the Django documentation. So, like I said earlier, I'm much more obsessed with optimization. So when I'm writing a query, after I write it in my own way or the way I think it should, I run over to the doc and say, oh, how is it supposed to be done to optimize this? Can I make it faster? So it's not really a thing of, it's just the normal stuff you do. Just, I don't know, watch courses, read tutorials. Don't forget to always do the actual coding because experience is actually very, and then the Django documentation is more than sufficient for you to learn stuff. The more things you can do in Django and stack, the better. Yeah, awesome, control, awesome. The more stuff you do, the better. I mean, the more you do, the more you learn. Yeah. So that's gonna be my last question for today. If you have any other questions, you can tweet at me. My Twitter handle is underscore Emirates underscore, or you can send me a mail if you have access to that. I'm gonna share my slides in the chat room now, as well as a link to my repo, so you can just go ahead and just go through it if you need anything on that. And my slide has a couple of references here, so you can just use that to understand this better. Yeah, that's it. Thank you all for listening, and yeah.